On July 1, 2012, the European Union's oil embargo on Iran was put into effect. On March 17th, all Iranian banks identified as institutions in breach of EU sanctions were disconnected from the SWIFT, the world's hub of electronic financial transactions. Moreover, on June 28th, the US also enforced an oil embargo on the Islamic Republic of Iran. In February 2012, the US froze all the property of the Central Bank of Iran and other Iranian financial institutions in the United States. And these are just the latest sanctions imposed on Iran. Since 2006, 6 resolutions have been passed against it. Since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, the US has sanctioned Iran many times under various pretexts, involving things like human rights, terrorism and Iran's nuclear program. Even some vital goods are barred from entering the country, like medication and spare parts for airplanes. Almost immediately after Iran's Islamic Revolution, the US imposed sanctions on Tehran. US intervention in Iran's affairs after the Islamic Revolution angered the youth of a nation that had just won a revolution. In November 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the US Embassy and took 52 Americans hostage. Inside the US Embassy, shredded documents indicating US espionage inside Iran were found and reassembled by the Iranian students. Washington responded by freezing about $12 billion of Iranian assets in the US, including gold and bank deposits. After Iraq invaded Iran, Washington intensified the sanctions, banning the sale of weapons to Iran. It also banned all international financial institutions from giving Iran loans. In October 1987, the US banned the exploitation of any goods and services imports from Iran. In March 1995, President Clinton prohibited US trade in Iran's oil industry. And in May of the same year, he took it one step further, banning any US trade with Iran. In 1996, it was ruled that all foreign companies that invest more than $20 million in the development of Iran's petroleum industry would face US penalties. Then in February 2004, the US ruled against the editing or publishing of scientific manuscripts from Iran and said US scientists could be prosecuted for collaborating with their Iranian counterparts. In June 2005, the US froze the assets of those involved in Iran's nuclear program. On July 1, 2010, the US Senate and House of Representatives passed the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions Accountability and Divestment Act, which greatly enhanced sanctions on Iran by placing an embargo on major Iranian exports. From 2007 to 2012, Washington has frozen the assets of almost all Iranian banks. And finally, in February 2012, the US froze all the property of Iran's central bank and other financial institutions within the US. All the companies collaborating with or investing in Iran's oil industry were told to choose between Washington and Tehran. On the 23rd of January 2012, the EU agreed to an oil embargo on Iran effective from July and to freeze the assets of Iran's central bank. So Iran has seen more than 30 years of economic pressure.
It is my goal to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but I sure would rather do it diplomatically. I'm keeping all options on the table, but if I can do it diplomatically, that's how we should do it. And I would think that would be the preference of everybody up on Capitol Hill, because that sure is the preference of the American people. And we lose nothing during this negotiation period, precisely because there are verification provisions in place. We will have more insight into Iran's nuclear program over the next 6 months than we have previously. We'll know if they are violating the terms of the agreement. They're not allowed to accelerate their stockpile of enriched uranium. In fact, they have to reduce their stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Ironically, if we did not have this 6-month period in which we're testing whether we can get a comprehensive solution to this problem, they'd be advancing even further on their nuclear program. And in light of all that, what I've said to members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, is there is no need for new sanctions legislation. Not yet. Now, if Iran comes back and says, we can't give you assurances that we're not going to weaponize, if they're not willing to address some of their capabilities that we know could end up resulting in them having breakout capacity, it's not going to be hard for us to turn the dials back, strengthen sanctions even further. I'll work with members of Congress to put even more pressure on Iran. But there's no reason to do it right now. Listen, I don't think the Iranians have any doubt that Congress would be more than happy to pass more sanctions legislation. We can do that in a day, on a dime. But if we're serious about negotiations, we've got to create an atmosphere in which Iran is willing to move in ways that are uncomfortable for them and contrary to their ideology and rhetoric and their instincts and their suspicions of us. And we don't help get them to a position where we can actually resolve this by engaging in this kind of action.
Today, almost exactly 6 months after finalization of the historic deal, the International Atomic Energy Agency has verified that Iran has implemented its nuclear-related commitments under the JCPOA. As Iran has fulfilled its commitments, today multilateral and national economic and financial sanctions related to Iran's nuclear program are lifted in accordance with the JCPOA.
The Iranian foreign minister receives a hero's welcome back in Tehran. He's just returned from Vienna, where he took part in the historic announcement that international sanctions against Iran will now be lifted. The president, Hassan Rouhani, has been a strong advocate of the negotiations all along. He heralded the implementation of the deal as a golden day in the country's history.
So negotiators from Iran and the 6 big world powers have just emerged from months of negotiations in Austria and Switzerland to announce that, believe it or not, they have an Iran nuclear deal.
Every pathway to a nuclear weapon is cut off.
But what does that actually mean? How does all that actually work? Well, this gets technical really fast, but it helps if you go through and look at some of the most important issues. One of the big ones is uranium. That's the stuff. You dig it out of the ground, use it for nuclear fuel for a power plant or even for a bomb. The deal requires Iran to give up 97% of its enriched uranium, almost all of it, down to just a 300 kilogram stockpile, not very much. Uranium comes in different levels of enrichment. Now, this restriction is really severe. Iran is only allowed to have its uranium up to 3.67% enrichment. And to give you a sense of what that means, medical research grade uranium is enriched to 20%, and weapons grade uranium is enriched to 90%. So Iran's uranium is going to be way down at 3.67%, very safe in energy grade and not something that is anywhere near what can be used for a nuclear weapon. Iran is going to give up most of its centrifuges. It's going to go from 20,000 centrifuges to just 5,000 that are spinning fissile material, plus another 1,000 that it can use for research and development but can't use fissile material. And if Iran decided one day, you know what, we don't like this deal anymore, we're going to build a bomb, it would take it a really long time to do it. And that gets to another really important issue, and that's inspections. Inspections and monitoring are how we make sure that Iran is sticking to their end of the deal and that they're not cheating. The inspections that the U.S. got out of this deal are frankly just astonishing. One arms control analyst said he thought there was, quote, almost a 100% chance that if Iran cheated, it would be caught by these inspections. That's how good they are. So what does Iran get for accepting all of this? What Iran gets is relief from the economic sanctions that have been just crippling its economy. But what these sanctions do is they cut off Iran's economy from the outside world. They cut it off from international banking, international finance. These have been just devastating Iran's economy. They are really desperate to get out from under these. And this is a big deal not just for Iran the state, but for the 77 million people of Iran who it's a big middle class and they've been suffering under economic sanctions for too long. And they will finally get to have a chance at having a real economy, hopefully very soon after this.
I think it's crazy. I think the whole Iran deal is the dumbest deal that you can imagine. I think it's going to go down as one of the worst deals in the history of this country, maybe of the world. It is a total and complete catastrophe. And, you know, it's beyond even talking about it. So it's hard to believe that people actually, do we have negotiators? Do we have anybody that knows what they're doing? Not only the 24 days, which, by the way, it's much more than that, because the 24 days to start the clock takes a long time. Not only the fact that they still have our prisoners, every single aspect of that deal is incompetent. And it's a deal that shouldn't be approved. And the amazing thing is, even if it's not approved now, they get $150 billion plus, and they're going to use that money for terror all over the world. It is one of the great dumb deals of our time. It's going to lead to, in my opinion, nuclear proliferation. It's going to, so many things are going to come out of that deal for the bad. And I'll tell you, Israel is in big trouble. Probably something will happen because Israel, I don't know how Israel can live with that deal.